It happened in the middle of the night when the phone buzzed against Jasmine Crockett's nightstand, jolting her awake. The light from the screen cut through the darkness of her bedroom, illuminating her face in pale blue. Her heart pounded as she read the message. "I have something that'll shake the court. Meet me." There was no name, no context, just a location and a time. The steps of the Supreme Court, 3 a.m. Could it be true? Could someone have dug up proof of the brewing ethics scandal that everyone else seemed content to ignore? Jasmine glanced at the clock, 2:42 a.m. She understood, in that instant, how quickly the world could turn on a single revelation. Without a moment's hesitation, she grabbed her coat, slipped on her boots, and headed out into the pre-dawn chill, every step echoing her determination. By the time she reached those stone steps, the Capitol was nearly silent, as though holding its breath. That's when she saw him, a silhouette against the faint glow of the Capitol's lights, face obscured by a cap pulled low. He handed her a sealed envelope, and before she could say a word, melted back into the shadows. Jasmine hesitated for a heartbeat, then ripped it open. Inside were documents, leaked memos, financial ledgers, internal emails that pointed directly to Chief Justice John Roberts, implicating him in an ethics cover-up that stretched back years. A hush fell over her, and she realized nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn broke over Washington as Jasmine's thoughts raced. She didn't belong here at this hour, chasing whispers. She was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She had a reputation for fierce tenacity, but this was different. This was the heart of American justice itself. She tucked the envelope into her bag and melted into the early morning crowd, the weight of what she carried pressing on her shoulders. In her mind, she replayed every moment of her career, her first town hall, her campaign speeches, the nights she spent poring over policy drafts. All of it had led her here. She thought of her constituents, teachers, nurses, service members, who believed in the promise of fair play. If Roberts had been compromised, if the highest court in the land could be manipulated, their faith would crumble. Jasmine exhaled slowly. There was only one thing she could do: confront the truth head-on. Later that morning, Jasmine arrived at her office on Capitol Hill, the envelope still unopened on her desk. She paced the length of her office, watching cherry blossoms drift past the windows. Her aide, Marcus, hovered at the threshold. "Morning, Congresswoman. You look like you've seen a ghost." Jasmine met his gaze, eyes steely. "I need a secure channel. Immediately. Something's come up, something big." Marcus's face tightened. "I'll get on it right away." Jasmine nodded and closed her office door. Alone, she slid a copy of the documents onto her desk, scanned the top sheet. It was a memo from a clerk at the Supreme Court, acknowledging a special private donation routed through an anonymous foundation, funds that had quietly lined the pockets of Justice Harper's daughter. Justice Harper, a close ally of Roberts, had helped steer a ruling that benefited the donor's business empire, and the trail led straight to Roberts's inner circle. Jasmine's pulse thundered. She'd heard rumors, whispers in back hallways, quiet warnings from colleagues. But this was the smoking gun. By noon, she was in a secure room with Marcus and one of her trusted lawyers, Neela Singh. Neela clicked through the encrypted files on her laptop. "If this is real, the implications are staggering," she said softly. "This isn't just a minor breach of protocol. This is systemic corruption at the highest level." Jasmine leaned forward. "We need confirmation. We'll have to verify these source emails, track the money trail. And then—" she paused, her gaze unwavering. "Then we take it public." The next few days were a blur. Jasmine balanced committee hearings, constituent meetings, and late-night strategy sessions in her office. With Neela's help, she traced the funds to a shell company based in Delaware, then uncovered records showing it had ties to a billionaire real estate magnate with interests before the court. Each new piece of evidence confirmed her worst fears. Word got around that Jasmine was chasing something explosive. Whispers buzzed through the halls of Congress. She saw colleagues glance at her with a mix of awe and fear, aware that her actions could trigger a constitutional crisis. She greeted every call, every knock at her door, with unwavering calm. But beneath the surface, her mind churned. How far would this go? Who else was involved? And could she survive if the system turned on her? On Thursday evening, Jasmine stood on the steps of the Hart Senate office building, her breath visible in the cool spring air. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing like stars in the darkness. She looked out at the sea of microphones, lifted the envelope of evidence. "Good evening," she began, voice strong. "Today, I am compelled to share information that demands immediate congressional investigation into allegations of a Supreme Court ethics scandal involving Chief Justice John Roberts." Her words hung in the air. Reporters snapped photos. The internet lit up with breaking news alerts. Jasmine watched them for a moment, felt the gravity of it. These documents allege that private funds, routed through a clandestine foundation, have influenced at least one Supreme Court decision. The American people deserve the truth, and I will not rest until it is delivered. She stepped away from the podium without looking back, knowing that her life, and the fate of the court, had just tilted on its axis. Behind closed doors in the Judiciary Committee, tensions crackled. Senators on both sides of the aisle clamored for her to reveal her sources, questioned her motives, suggested partisan games. Jasmine sat tall at the witness table, flanked by Neela and Marcus. She answered each question with precision. "I cannot disclose my source at this time. I have no reason to believe this is politically motivated. Yes, I believe Chief Justice Roberts must testify under oath." As the hearing went on, cameras recorded every flicker of her expression. She watched senators whisper, sometimes nod, other times frown. But she knew she had done the right thing. When it was over, she exited the room to a maelstrom of journalists. Cell phones buzzed. Reporters shouted questions. Jasmine didn't slow her pace. She climbed into her car, closed the door, and took a deep breath. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clear. The real battle had just begun. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Republicans plotted to discredit Jasmine. Conservative pundits labeled her a partisan zealot. Late-night hosts accused her of grandstanding. Social media lit up with conspiracy theories. Why won't Crockett reveal her leak? This is a Democrat witch hunt. Republicans filed motions to have her censured, demanded that she surrender the documents for evidence. Jasmine watched it all unfold, grimly aware that the forces aligned against her were vast. She convened a strategy session in her office. Neela laid out legal options: seek a protective order, secure classified versions of the documents, press for a special counsel. "We need to manage the narrative," Neela said. "We have to show the American people why this matters, beyond Washington noise. We need allies, advocates, maybe other Congress members willing to speak up." Jasmine nodded. "Arrange meetings with bipartisan members. We need their support, even if it's quiet." Marcus chimed in. "I can set up a series of town halls. Emmy, a journalist ally, already offered to help broadcast." Jasmine's eyes gleamed. "Good. Let's make sure every American knows their rights are at stake." Days later, Jasmine found herself back at the Supreme Court, this time in sessions of the Judiciary Committee. She watched from the gallery as Roberts took the stand. His eyes were guarded, his demeanor measured. When questioned about these allegations, he answered with practiced caution, "I have never allowed external influences to affect my decisions." His words sounded rehearsed, too perfect. Jasmine felt a pang of doubt, but reminded herself that she needed to push further. She rose for questioning. "Chief Justice Roberts, can you explain why records indicate a private donation from the Sterling Foundation was made to a trust benefiting Justice Harper's immediate family, mere weeks before the landmark preservation case ruling?" The room held its breath. Roberts's gaze flicked to his counsel before responding. "I am not aware of any direct connection between the donation and the case. Any suggestion otherwise is unfounded." Jasmine watched him, her jaw set. "Is it not true that the Sterling Foundation CEO was present at your private residence just 3 days before the ruling?" Roberts paused, then admitted quietly, "We socialized on a personal level, but no professional discussions took place." Jasmine leaned in. "And yet, the timing raises concerns. Justice Harper recused himself from that ruling, but his daughter's law firm argued the same case before the court. Could that be considered a conflict of interest?" The Chief Justice's eyes narrowed. All recusal decisions are made with rigorous adherence to our code of ethics. Jasmine leaned back, knowing she had landed the point. The room erupted into murmurs, Roberts's calm facade flickering for just a moment. That night, Jasmine sat alone in her hotel room. The city lights of D.C. stretched below like a glittering grid. She replayed every moment of the hearing, searched for slips or admissions. Her phone pinged with messages, supporters offering praise, opponents filing new motions. She typed a quick update to her staff, "Get me that donation ledger from Delaware, stat." She exhaled and closed her eyes. Could she really take on the Chief Justice himself? She thought of her mother's voice, years ago, saying, "Stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." Jasmine opened her laptop, drafted a statement for the next morning's press releases. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. This was more than politics. This was the integrity of the judicial branch. As dawn approached, Jasmine met Marcus and Neela at a cozy coffee shop near the Capitol. The smell of espresso filled the air, mixing with the quiet hum of early commuters. Neela slid a folder across the table. "Here's the ledger. Follow the money. Sterling Foundation donated $5 million to the Huntington Trust. Then the trust funneled $2 million directly to Justice Harper's daughter's firm. All within 60 days of the preservation case." Marcus pointed to a highlighted page. "And look here, the CEO, Maxwell Sterling, lists his primary residence as the same neighborhood where Roberts has a rental property. They attend the same country club." Jasmine's pulse quickened. "This is solid. We can prove a pattern." Neela nodded. "But we need to connect Roberts's personal interests to court decisions. Otherwise, he'll claim social acquaintance, no conflict." Jasmine tapped her pen on the table. "Then let's find out which cases Sterling's businesses had before the court in the past decade. I'll request the dockets." She ran a hand through her hair. "If we can show that Roberts' decisions consistently benefited Sterling's portfolio, that's enough to call for impeachment proceedings." Marcus grinned. "I'll start preparing the public brief. We need to make this airtight." Jasmine took a deep breath, letting the steam of her coffee warm her face. "Let's do it." Over the next week, Jasmine spearheaded a blitz. Her team compiled case after case. Roberts wrote, joined, or influenced rulings that favored Sterling's commercial interests. One after another, zoning disputes in Texas, environmental regulations in California, tax breaks in New York. Each footnote, each vote, formed a pattern too compelling to ignore. She shared her findings with the press. Reams of documents, charts showing the overlap between Sterling's ventures and the court's decisions. The public outcry was immediate. Talk radio hosts debated the scandal. Social media trended #RobertsEthics. Protesters assembled on the steps of the court. Meanwhile, Republicans in Congress backed away. Some called for a bipartisan inquiry. Others remained silent. Jasmine felt their shifting loyalties as a tangible force, like a wind trying to knock her off course. But she stood firm, insisting on facts over rhetoric. Midway through this storm, Jasmine found herself alone in her office late one night. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed. She flipped open her notebook, scanned her own writing. Internal monologue. "They'll try to paint me as a radical, but I'm fighting for the Constitution." She scribbled more notes, questions for her next interview, talking points for her town hall, legal citations for Roberts's past conflicts. She paused, closed her eyes, and remembered her first campaign rally, when she promised her district that she would always put people first. She thought of the teachers in Fort Worth, the veterans in Arlington, the small business owners in Dallas, who all depended on fair, impartial justice. She whispered to herself, "I'm doing this for them." For the first time in days, she felt a tremor of uncertainty. Could she really topple the man who had been, for years, the steward of American law? But when she thought of the countless unnamed people who had been harmed by decisions they didn't even realize were tainted by bias, her resolve hardened. She picked up her pen and wrote at the top of the page, "No turning back." Days later, Jasmine stood before cameras at a hastily scheduled press conference outside the Capitol. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, her suit crisp. At her side, Neela held a stack of binders, each packed with evidence. Jasmine addressed the crowd with calm intensity. Today, I am calling for the immediate formation of a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee to investigate the potential conflicts of interest involving Chief Justice John Roberts. The evidence shows a pattern of decisions that benefited private interests connected directly to the justice's personal circle. This threatens the very foundation of our legal system. We cannot allow a veneer of impartiality to mask potential corruption. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones buzzed. Jasmine paused, locking eyes with a cameraman. "Will Roberts resign if the subcommittee finds wrongdoing?" she was asked. She replied, "He must answer for his actions. The American people deserve to know whether their highest arbiter of law was, in fact, compromised." Back in her office, Jasmine's phone vibrated nonstop. Calls from fellow Congress members, late-night shows wanting interviews, foreign media seeking commentary. She felt the tremor of history in her bones. The last time a Chief Justice faced ethics scrutiny had been decades ago. She sifted through voicemails, one from her mother, voice trembling with pride and fear. Another from Franklin, her husband, former judge and steadfast ally. He urged caution. "They'll come for you, Jasmine. Be careful." She pressed her palm to the phone. "I know, but if I don't do this, who will?" She ended the call, her heart a storm of conflict. Her public duty pulling her one way, her family's safety pulling another. But she couldn't walk away now. 2 weeks later, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee convened. The room was packed. Senators, journalists, law clerks, interns of interns. The headline of the day, Crockett versus Roberts, Ethics in Peril. As the hearing began, Jasmine watched as Roberts took the stand again, more reserved this time. She noted the way his eyes flicked to the gallery, searching for friendly faces. Senators asked questions, chased footnotes, cited legal precedents. Jasmine listened from her place among the committee members, feeling the current of tension in the room. Then came her turn to speak. She rose, her legs steady, voice firm. "Chief Justice Roberts, my questions revolve around the preservation case of 2022. Evidence shows that 1. Sterling Foundation donated $5 million to Huntington Trust, which then funneled $2 million directly to Justice Harper's daughter's law firm. 2. Maxwell Sterling attended multiple events at your Summerbrook estate in 2021. And 3. You authored a concurring opinion that significantly benefited Sterling's real estate holdings. Can you explain how that does not constitute a conflict of interest?" Roberts's face tightened. He inhaled slowly. "The Sterling Foundation donation was intended for charitable purposes, not personal gain. My relationship with Mr. Sterling is purely social. My opinion in preservation case was based solely on legal merits." Jasmine pressed on. "Yet, internal memos reveal that your clerks prepared a draft opinion at the request of Justice Harper's clerk, timed perfectly to influence the market value of Sterling development stocks. Were you aware of any communications between your clerks and the Sterling law firm in the weeks before the ruling?" A hush fell. Roberts's gaze flicked away. "I cannot comment on internal clerk communications. All decisions were made with scholarly independence." Jasmine held her gaze. "Then the subcommittee must subpoena your clerks, your social calendars, your financial disclosures. The American people deserve nothing less." The gavel banged. Senators murmured. Roberts retreated, color drained from his face. Jasmine sunk into her seat, chest heaving. She had scored a direct hit. That evening, Jasmine and Franklin sat at home, late dinner untouched between them. The city outside was a tapestry of lights. Jasmine drained her wine glass, eyes distant. Franklin reached across the table and took her hand. "You were brilliant today." Jasmine pulled her hand back, rubbed her temples. "I'm running out of time. They're going to try to bury this. The Senate Majority Leader's already talking about smear campaigns." Franklin exhaled. "You knew this would be hard." Jasmine's lips quivered. "I just didn't expect it to feel so raw." Franklin slid a folder across the table. "I hired a private investigator. He's tracking any threats, anonymous harassment, security concerns. We want you safe." Jasmine's jaw clenched. "They can't scare me off, Franklin. Not now. Not ever. He nodded. I know, but I need to know you're okay. She looked at him, her eyes bright and fierce. I'll be fine. I have to be. He gave a half smile, worry etched in his eyes. Then tomorrow, we keep fighting. As the days ticked by, the subcommittee's work consumed the headlines. New revelations surfaced. Roberts had accepted lavish Caribbean vacations funded by unknown benefactors. Justice Harper's daughter's firm had billed over $1 million in consulting fees to Sterling-affiliated companies. A new memo showed Roberts's clerk had emailed justification talking points directly to a Sterling executive. Jasmine's team distributed these materials to every major news outlet. Cable news anchors debated with heated intensity. Was this a constitutional crisis? Should Roberts step aside pending investigation? Meanwhile, late-night comedians piled on, turning Roberts into a caricature of judicial rot. The pressure mounted to a crescendo. One afternoon, Jasmine took a break and walked through the Lincoln Memorial Grounds. The air smelled of cut grass and cherry blossoms. She paused at the reflecting pool, staring at the memorial's distant white silhouette. In that moment, she doubted everything. The cost to her family, the backlash from constituents who believed she was unpatriotic, the fear that she might lose this fight, and with it, the faith of the very people she swore to protect. She closed her eyes, felt the breeze on her face, and reminded herself of the oath she took to uphold the Constitution. "This is bigger than me," she whispered. She opened her eyes, determination flaring anew. She would not let the court's sanctity be tarnished. Just then, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Roberts to appear in emergency session. Private. Noon tomorrow. Be there. No explanation, just a summons. Jasmine's pulse quickened. Franklin met her at home that evening, briefing her on the clandestine hearing. They're calling it a judicial self-examination. Roberts is going to speak directly to the court about ethics reforms. No public cameras allowed. Jasmine paced the living room, reciting talking points to herself under her breath. This is his last stand. If he can't convincingly argue that he's above this, his legacy is finished. Franklin watched her, concern etched deep. Are you prepared? We don't know what goes on behind those closed doors. Jasmine nodded. We have to go, and knowing the truth won't be enough. He'll spin it. We need to be ready to confront him immediately after. The next day, Jasmine arrived at the Supreme Court basement entrance just before noon. A small group of Congress members, both Republicans and Democrats, stood around, some allies, others skeptics. They exchanged hushed conversations. Jasmine slipped through security, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. Inside a spacious conference room, Roberts sat at the head of an oval table, flanked by other justices. Their robes and collars were stark against the bright overhead lights. As Jasmine entered, Roberts's gaze locked on hers for a brief second, a flicker of respect, or was it recognition of her determination, passing between them? She took her seat among the assembled legislators. The hush was profound, the weight of the moment oppressive. Roberts cleared his throat. Members of Congress, esteemed colleagues, I stand before you today to address allegations of impropriety, allegations that strike at the heart of the judiciary. His voice was steady, measured. I want to speak plainly. I have always upheld the highest standards of integrity. Any suggestion I have allowed personal relationships to influence my judicial duties is false. Jasmine listened carefully, noting every nuance, the slight trembling in his left hand, the way his jaw clenched when referencing Sterling's name. After his address, he opened the floor for questions. Jasmine rose, her breath steady. Chief Justice Roberts, in your statement, you said that any suggestion of improper influence is false. Yet we have evidence of direct financial transactions benefiting Justice Harper's immediate family, timed around your rulings. How do you reconcile that? Roberts's facade flickered. He inhaled deeply. Those transactions were arranged without my knowledge. I recuse myself when necessary. I trust the system. Jasmine shot back. But internal communications show your clerks were coordinating with Sterling executives prior to the preservation case, drafting opinions intended to boost stock value. Are you telling this committee your clerks acted independently, without your oversight. A bead of sweat appeared at Roberts's temple. He hesitated. Clerks do substantial work, but final opinions bear my name. Any errors are mine. Jasmine leaned forward. Then you admit your clerk's communications with outside interests. Doesn't that reflect a failure to supervise, and thus a breach of your duty to ensure impartiality? Roberts's eyes narrowed. I oversee all clerk activities. Any deviation is unacceptable. Jasmine pressed on, refusing to relent. The exchange grew tense, a clash of wills echoing beneath the marble halls. When it ended, Roberts nodded curtly, gathering his notes, and strode out. Jasmine exhaled, realizing that Roberts's words, though carefully chosen, were not enough to quell doubt. The subcommittee adjourned with chaos swirling. Senators whispered, reporters scrambled, and Jasmine knew the dam had cracked. She had laid bare cracks in the court's armor, but the final verdict would rest with the American people, and perhaps with the justices themselves. That evening, Jasmine held a live-stream town hall from her district in Fort Worth. The room was filled with constituents, teachers, shop owners, students, faces upturned, expectant. Jasmine shared every detail of the day's hearing. The closed-door confessions, the unanswered questions, the gaping holes in Roberts's defense. She showed them documents on a large screen, pointed out the money trail. Questions flew. Are you suggesting the Chief Justice is corrupt? What happens if Congress tries to impeach him? How can we trust the Supreme Court now? Jasmine's voice was calm but impassioned. I am not saying we have every piece of the puzzle, but I am saying no one is above scrutiny. If the people whose job it is to safeguard justice cannot be held accountable, then justice itself is at risk. What we do next matters. We can't allow our institutions to be hollowed out by secrecy. We must demand transparency. The crowd erupted in applause. By the end, her feed had gone viral across social media. People wrote messages from across the country. Thank you for exposing the truth. We stand with Jasmine. What can we do to help? As she signed off, her eyes burned with resolve. This was no longer just her fight. It had become a movement. 2 weeks later, a seismic shift occurred. For current Supreme Court justices, in an unprecedented move, issued a public statement calling for an independent commission to investigate ethics at the court, an action that implicitly acknowledged that confidence in the court was faltering. The judiciary world trembled. Roberts was barricaded in his chambers, his clerks in panic. Jasmine watched the news from her office, heart pounding. She knew this was the turning point. The question now was, would Congress act swiftly or allow inertia to cripple justice? She convened an emergency meeting with her colleagues. On one side, moderate Republicans who wanted to salvage the court's reputation. On the other, staunch conservatives insisting any probe would be a left-wing conspiracy. Jasmine stood between them like a fulcrum. If we do nothing, if we wait, we become complicit, she said. This isn't about party. It's about preserving the rule of law. We owe it to the American people to lead, even if it's uncomfortable. Slowly, heads nodded. The hearing schedule was set, a vote on forming a bipartisan commission. That night, Jasmine fell asleep at her desk, head against her arms. Dreams of marble columns and burdened scales swirled behind her eyelids. She awoke hours later, heart pounding, the weight of history pressed down on her. She slung on her coat and walked the empty corridors of Congress. In the darkness, her silhouette stretched long across the marble floors. For a moment, she whispered to the silent halls, "We cannot fail." She pressed a call through to a young intern who had been helping her craft legal memos. Get a head start on the commission's charter. Outline terms, scope, membership, that stuff. We're moving fast. The intern's voice crackled with excitement. On it, Congresswoman. Jasmine hung up, her mind already racing through next steps. The vote took place on a brisk morning. The chamber was packed, noisy, electric. Senators and representatives gathered behind their desks, some frowning, others smiling. Jasmine watched from her seat on the House floor. When her name was called to speak in favor, she rose, cleared her throat. Respectfully, my colleagues, our institutions were built on checks and balances. We trust the court to interpret the law, but without accountability, trust withers. Today, I urge you to vote for transparency, for justice, for the future of our democracy." She sat, chest heaving, as the clerk called roll. The tally came back. The commission would proceed. A cheer rose in the chamber. Jasmine exhaled, relief and pride mingling. Weeks of battle, sleepless nights, had yielded something profound, the promise of an independent inquiry into the highest court of the land. And all because she refused to back down. But the fight was far from over. In the days that followed, Roberts's allies scrambled to undermine the commission, filing legal challenges, leaking rumors about Jasmine's motives, even attempting to discredit her character. She endured late-night phone calls from anonymous threats, her family's security tightened, her staff exhausted. Yet, as the public watched, they saw her standing firm, unwavering even when the machine tried to grind her down. She held her head high, continued her relentless work, even flying to the West Coast to speak at a university symposium on judicial ethics. Students looked at her like she was a rock star, phones out, cameras flashing. In her speech, she challenged them. If you care about justice, if you believe in the Constitution, you must hold every institution, every person, to account. Silence is complicity. The crowd roared. She smiled, felt a surge of hope. The next generation was ready to carry the torch. Months passed. The commission worked tirelessly, interviewing clerks, examining bank records, poring over internal correspondence. Meanwhile, the court's public approval ratings plummeted. Polls showed that a majority of Americans now believed Roberts had compromised his duties. Beyond the headlines, ordinary people shared stories of times they'd felt powerless, disallowed evidence, perceived bias, a sense that the system was rigged. Jasmine read each letter, every email, tears stinging her eyes. She realized her fight wasn't just for the court, it was for every person who ever felt they didn't matter. Then, on a sweltering midsummer afternoon, the commission released its interim report. It detailed extensive lapses in the court's ethics code, no enforceable rules for recusal, no transparency for private interactions, and specifically, evidence that Roberts and Harper had violated ethical norms. The report stopped short of a definitive verdict on Roberts's culpability, but recommended sweeping reforms: a binding ethics code, outside oversight, and mandatory disclosure of justices' financial ties. The news exploded. Jasmine watched from a secure hearing room as reporters dissected every paragraph. She exhaled, hope and apprehension mingling. The reforms were real, but would they stick? Roberts had declined to comment. Silence from the court rattled the nation. That evening, Jasmine returned home to a flood of congratulatory messages. She opened a letter from a teacher in Arkansas. "Because of you, I feel like my voice matters." Another from a veteran in Florida. "You fought for me, someone who never thought the court cared about people like me." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Franklin hugged her from behind, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he whispered, "You did it. You changed the conversation." Jasmine leaned into him, but her mind already raced ahead. They still needed to enshrine those reforms into law. In late August, the Judiciary Committee convened again, this time to debate the Judicial Accountability and Ethics Reform Act. The bill would codify the Commission's recommendations, creating a standing ethics committee for the court, requiring justices to file financial disclosures publicly, and imposing penalties for undisclosed conflicts. Republicans and Democrats lined up against each other. Some voiced concerns about separation of powers, others demanded bolder reforms. Jasmine stood before the committee, her voice ringing out. "We have arrived at a crossroads. Either we allow a cloud of suspicion to continue to hover over our most revered institution, or we act decisively to restore faith. The reforms we propose do not politicize the court. They preserve its integrity. They ensure that every American, regardless of wealth, status, or identity, can trust that justice is blind, fair, and beyond reproach." She sat as the room filled with murmurs. When the vote came, the bill passed by a narrow margin. Jasmine exhaled, relief and pride flooding her senses. The next stop, the House floor. At home that night, Jasmine collapsed into bed, exhaustion washing over her. Franklin tucked her in. "You know, I never doubted you," he said quietly. Jasmine reached for his hand. "I doubted myself every step of the way. But we're not done." He kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, you go out there and finish it." Jasmine turned away, mind already drafting her farewell remarks for when the House passed the bill. In early September, the House convened a historic session. The floor was packed with dignitaries, former justices, media cameras. Jasmine knew this was her moment to frame history. When her name was called to speak, she approached the podium, heart pounding. She looked out at rows of representatives, some angry, some begrudgingly respectful. She inhaled and began. "Fellow Americans, today we stand at a pivotal moment. We have witnessed how unchecked power, even at the highest echelons, can corrode trust, sow doubt, and fracture the bonds that hold us together. The Supreme Court is not just a building of marble and columns. It is a symbol of our nation's highest ideals: impartiality, fairness, justice. Yet, when the public cannot be certain those ideals are upheld, the court loses its power to command respect." She paused, scanning faces. "That is why I stand before you to urge passage of the Judicial Accountability and Ethics Reform Act. This bill does not undermine the court, it fortifies it. It ensures that every justice, every clerk, every decision is subject to the light of transparency. Because justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done." A hush descended, then ripples of applause. Jasmine continued, voice steady, weaving in stories from constituents whose faith had been shattered by perceived injustice. She concluded, "When future generations look back, they will judge us by what we do today. I urge you to vote yes, not for politics, but for the promise of America." She returned to her seat as the clerk began the roll call. When the final tallies appeared, yes, 217, no, 198, Jasmine exhaled, tears pricking her eyes. The room erupted in cheers. She allowed herself a small smile, knowing how close it had come. But as she stepped away from the podium, her face serious again, Franklin appeared at her side. He slipped an arm around her shoulder. She looked up, whispered, "We still have to get it through the Senate." He nodded. One step at a time. The Senate debated bitterly for weeks. Amendments were proposed, some to weaken the ethics oversight, others to expand it. Lobbyists descended, pouring money into advocacy. Jasmine spent every waking hour on the phone, rallying support, coordinating with Republican allies who valued judicial integrity over partisanship. Her phone calls often stretched until dawn. Then, one morning, the Senate floor erupted with cheers. The Judicial Accountability and Ethics Reform Act had passed, the first time Congress had ever enacted binding ethics rules for the Supreme Court. Jasmine sank into her seat, relief and triumph flooding her. Her voice caught as she whispered to the senator next to her, "We did it." He nodded, eyes shining. "You did it." The next day, front-page headlines ran across the nation. Supreme Court overhaul enacted, judicial integrity restored. Crockett leads ethics reforms. Jasmine watched as cable news anchors debated the long-term impact. She smiled faintly, knowing they still questioned how it would play out. But she had faith in the process, and faith in the American people. That evening, Jasmine returned to Fort Worth for a victory event at her district's community center. The gymnasium was packed, rows of folding chairs filled with supporters, local leaders, volunteers. A banner read, "Thank you, Jasmine Crockett." Children wore T-shirts emblazoned with her face. When she climbed the stage, the crowd erupted. Jasmine spoke extemporaneously, her voice warm and fierce. She thanked her constituents, her staff, her family, especially Franklin. She spoke of all the people whose stories had fueled her fight. The teacher who was disciplined unjustly, the small business owner whose property rights had been jeopardized, the soldier denied a fair hearing. She dedicated the victory to them. This is for every American who ever looked at the court and wondered if they mattered. As the crowd cheered, Jasmine's eyes misted with tears, but she held her head high. Later, she slipped away to the basketball court behind the gym, where a pickup game had started. She joined in, laughter ringing as she dribbled, passed, and scored a layup. For a moment, she felt weightless, just herself, not a congresswoman, not a crusader. She savored the simple joy, the thud of the ball on the hardwood beneath flickering gym lights. When the game ended, she sat on the bleachers, cooling off, sweat cooling on her skin. Her mind drifted back to the beginning. The envelope on the Supreme Court steps, the first blow to her lunch table at that pre-dawn hour. She thought of every risk she'd taken, reputational, personal, familial. She thought of how often she had woken in the middle of the night with her heart pounding. And now, here she was. The next morning, Jasmine woke to texts from journalists, headshots of her on the local news, messages from constituents telling her to rest. She spent the day in town halls, listening to stories. A grandmother wept as she described her battle to get a fair ruling in her custody case. A student from UTA said, "It's because of you I believe my dream to become a lawyer is possible." Jasmine knelt to embrace them, thanked them, felt her purpose reaffirmed. By evening, she returned to D.C., life shifting back to its relentless pace. Bills to sponsor, hearings to prepare, constituents to serve. But now, something had changed. When she saw Roberts's portrait in the court's foyer, she felt neither anger nor fear, only resolve. The court had changed, and perhaps, in time, so would the culture of power in America. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine pushed for additional measures. Expansion of transparency to lower federal courts, stricter oversight of clerkship programs, greater accountability for federal judges. She held workshops, penned op-eds, collaborated with bipartisan coalitions. Wherever she went, people stopped her in airports, grocery stores, coffee shops, and told her, "Thank you. You gave us hope." Some shook her hand, others hugged her. She always paused, gave them her full attention, listened to their stories. Because she remembered how small they felt before she had spoken up, how voiceless. But her journey was not finished. Late one evening, as Jasmine prepared documents in her Capitol office, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The next battle is forming. Dissent is rising. They want to rewrite the focus on the next Supreme Court vacancy. They say they'll refuse any nominee who supports ethics reforms. Can you handle another fight? Jasmine leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. Her body ached. She had just finished a 12-hour workday on the current controversies. But she breathed in, steeled herself. Bring it on. She tapped a response. Tell them I'm ready. That night, she sat by her window, watching the lights of Georgetown flicker. She thought of how one envelope, one midnight meeting, had set off a chain reaction that swept across the nation. She thought of how many had been silenced, dismissed, cast aside when they dared ask questions. She thought of her own doubts, fears, and the moments when she wanted to turn back. But she had kept going. Because as she had learned on those lonely steps of the Supreme Court, sometimes the quietest voices hold the greatest power. She whispered into the darkness. Always. Months later, Jasmine received word that a new Supreme Court nominee would be revealed. Reports said the administration would choose a judge with a storied reputation for fairness, but critics warned he lacked clear ethics guidelines. Jasmine gathered her team. We'll vet him thoroughly. We'll ensure the next generation of justices upholds the standard we fought for. She opened her folder, scanned the list of potential nominees. Already, she felt the rush of adrenaline, the familiar charge of purpose. She dialed Neela. We're on. Let's get to work. As she hung up, she looked out at the moonlit halls of Congress. The fight for justice never ended. It simply evolved. But she was ready. At dawn, in the hush before the city awakened, Jasmine walked from her residence to her office once more. The streets were still, the sidewalks empty. She gripped her coat tighter as a breeze rustled the leaves. Farther down Pennsylvania Avenue, the Capitol dome glowed. She inhaled deeply, closed her eyes, and whispered, "We remain vigilant." Then she turned the corner, stepped into the building, and the cameras found her. As a nation watched, Jasmine Crockett, hero of an ethics revolution, prepared for the next chapter. Her story was far from over, because as long as power existed, there would be those who sought to hold it accountable. And Jasmine would be there, voice unwavering, ready to expose the truth, defend the powerless, and remind America that justice, once tested, must be protected with ferocity. If you want more jaw-dropping political dramas starring Jasmine Crockett, hit subscribe now.